Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss something which shouldn't really have been possible. A core member of the royal family attacking in courts, just to make sure it's a matter of public record, the British media as well as the Tory government. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, Prince Harry is taking the media to court, again, over press intrusion into people's private lives, again. In the latest case, Harry told the court, democracy fails when your press fails to scrutinise and hold the government accountable and instead choose to get into bed with them so they can ensure the status quo. Now, that would be an interesting statement for anyone to make, and given that this statement does nothing to further Harry's particular legal case, no idea how that's going, we can assume that he made the statement purely for the sake of attracting attention to what he feels, and I'm sure many of us agree with, that the British media does not represent the British public's interests. I mean, look at what the so-called mainstream media has been discussing over the past few weeks. A man had an affair, and some of his colleagues are pretending to be hurt about it. Is that front page news ever? Is it front page news for several weeks? Is it? No. The reason our media reported on Philip Schofield's downfall is not because they particularly had it in for him. He's not like Gary Lineker. He was as much of an establishment shill as any of them. No, it wasn't because he'd broken the law. He hadn't. It wasn't even because he offended public sensibilities. People really don't give a crap, other than perhaps enjoying reading about the scandal. The reason the media pushed this story well beyond its shelf life, which was really no more than a brief mention, was because they were desperate not to talk about anything actually newsworthy. If the media had to report the news of genuine public interest, what would they have to choose from? Boris Johnson suspected of committing way more lockdown crimes than we realised, and way worse crimes as well. Rishi Sunak delivering another cringeworthy photo opportunity. And then another. And then another. Blue on blue infighting within the party of government. The deceitful way the Prime Minister presented his meeting with other European leaders. The deceitful way the former Prime Minister presented his offer to the COVID inquiry. The COVID inquiry itself. The daily disasters of Brexit. Oh my goodness, no. Much better to present stories about how Philip Schofield let people down and how Holly what's-her-name is pretending that she had no idea and is really hurt about it all. Because what Harry said is absolutely true. The bit about the media failing to hold the government accountable and getting into bed with them to maintain a status quo. The argument about democracy failing, I could agree with it, but it's subjective. But the second half of his statement is objectively true. The first part, more a matter of opinion. But then it got me to thinking, how are the British media going to deal with Harry in the future? Like, apart from anything else, at the moment they're delighting in the fact, they're sort of thinking that America might throw him out over his admission of drug use in the past. And it's like thinking, yeah, you know what that means, don't you? It means he's going to come back here. You don't like him. Like, if a major celebrity makes a statement like this, usually what happens is half the people cheer him or her for saying it, and the other half dismiss them as a lefty liberal who shouldn't be given a platform. You know, the free speech crowd. Only this isn't a former footballer or artist. This is the son of the reigning monarch. True enough, the estrangement of Harry has allowed the media to attack him in much the same way they would attack someone like Gary Lineker, but it is a double-edged sword for them. The same estrangement gives Harry as much license to call out the British media as they think they have to whine about him. A few years ago, it was reported that he wanted to talk publicly and positively about Corbyn's Labour as being far preferable to the Tories. Unthinkable, of course, for a senior royal to make a political statement. Well, a lot seems to have happened since then, and it appears that he has a bit more freedom to make statements like this. And you know what? The reason for that is the very media who are complaining about him who have given him that power. Because if they didn't like how he was living his life or his choice of wife, which, you know, apparently remains totally unconnected to the colour of her skin, they could have just ignored him. You know, they are the ones who control the oxygen supply of publicity. They could have just said, well, we're not going to report about him. Nobody would have even known who Harry is, but for the media. There has been reasonable criticism of him courting attention one minute and then shouting for privacy the next. But he has a fairly complex relationship with fame. He is famous because of his birth. He distinguished himself in the army, sure, but no more than countless others. His lifestyle, his earning potential, everything he is essentially down to that accident of birth. And using the media is a big part of it. But wanting privacy is also a big part of his life. Because this is the same media who murdered his mother when he was just a small boy. And he will have understandable fears for his own young family when press intrusion crosses the line from curiosity to malevolence. But it is the British media who have been creating a rift between himself and his family for years, who've been instrumental in the separation that has afforded him the ability to stand up in court and say, the British media is shit, and you know what else? So's the government. His father probably spat his tea out at all that and wish he had the freedom to say something similar. And the more the media poke, the freer Harry will become. Imagine a future where he openly campaigns for a political party in the UK. It doesn't sound to me like it will be the Conservative Party. And the media will report on it because they just can't help themselves. But that's the wider picture. In terms of the court case, it is, as it always is, about excessive media intrusion. Harry makes the point that if you are famous, the media effectively consider you a target. I would put it more bluntly. They consider you a commodity, which they are free to harvest for their own purposes. We saw this entitled behaviour in the phone hacking scandal, which blew up in the wake of the Millie Dowler reporting years ago. There is an extent to which journalists are afforded a bit of leeway, legally speaking, when pursuing a story. Because some of the things they get up to, if it was you or I doing it, it would be called stalking and we would find ourselves in court. But journalists get away with it. And this is fine as long as no harm is done to innocent people and the story is not only reported accurately and fairly, but is also in the public interest. But although we still see this sort of investigative journalism taking place, all too often the gutter press abuse the same leeway simply to pursue salacious stories which are nothing more than celebrity gossip. There needs to be a distinction drawn between different types of news story. What some journalists get up to is, as I say, nothing more noble than stalking. And it should be considered as such as well, because it is harmful. It's harmful to the victims. I noticed that Byline Times have wondered if a Labour government would revisit Leveson, the recommendations that were suggested years ago, in a way that the Tories, of course, have shied away from. In fact, the last Tory manifesto said they would not only not implement the rest of Leveson, but they would abolish the bits that had been implemented. I don't think they've actually done that yet. Now, Byline Times seems doubtful that Labour will do anything different. Now, this is a reasonable fear, as there haven't been any definite policies announced about media regulation. But I have a little bit more optimism. See, it was just over 10 years ago that a certain Keir Starmer, then in charge of the Crown Prosecution Service, was getting ready to prosecute journalists. He secured some convictions, but many others got away with it. Now, when you have a situation where a lot were getting away with it, that is a sign to me that what he wasn't doing is what prosecutors often do. It's like, so what is the likelihood of prosecution? Because you don't want to waste resources. If a lot of them got away with it, it suggests to me that he wasn't just saying, right, we're going to focus on the ones for which we've got a watertight case. He was going, no, if there's any evidence against any of them, we're going to put them under the full spotlight of the law. He wasn't just putting the easy cases in the dock, making sure they all faced full scrutiny, as much scrutiny as the law could muster anyway. Starmer really wanted to deal with media abuse, but there is only so much you can do as a prosecutor. You can only prosecute based on the laws that exist at the time. You cannot make laws. But now he is the Prime Minister in waiting. Only half a year ago, there were a number of articles expressing alarm that the fact that not only it was Keir Starmer not cozying up to the media barons and senior editors, as Tony Blair had, but was talking positively about implementing Leveson recommendations in full. Now, it might be that Starmer hasn't made definite policy promises because he doesn't want to ignite a full-blown battle with the media while there is an election still to be won, but has abuses of the media in his sights. He has been careful to avoid getting drawn into discussions on matters which are not at the top of voters' agenda. But in government, we may find that he takes a more aggressive stance. After all, he doesn't even need to promise reforms in the manifesto. The recommendations were made years ago. There's even legislation for it. It just hasn't been turned on yet, really. And although the media will rage and try to claim it's an attack on the freedom of the press, they've only got themselves to blame. See, legislation, almost all legislation, is a case of prohibiting activities where people have abused their freedom to harm others. Usually the way legislation works is the government say, look, this behaviour is not really on, it's hurting people. Sort it out or we'll legislate. And then the group of people who are abusing it don't self-regulate. So the government goes, right, okay, well, we warned you, you didn't self-regulate, so now we will regulate you. That is how legislation works. And it's why a stable society needs the rule of law. It's ultimately to stop people being dicks to one another. If the British media had only watched Bill and Ted a few more times and followed the advice, they would not be facing the possibility of a reckoning in the near future. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.